We are going to start. So, Fikru going to present. The first presenter is Mr. Fikru, and the title is then from the book of abstract, we can see the profile of the presenters. We are going to immediately commence the presentation, the case of insurance sector liberalization in Ethiopia, prospects and challenges. And then we are going to have a lot of takeaways from this presentation, the prospectus and the challenges. And then immediately I'm going to invite the presenter, Fikru. Fikru, you have 15 minutes. Okay. Good morning, everyone. The title of my presentation is The Case for Insurance Sector Liberalization in Ethiopia, Prospects and Challenges. And my name is Fikru. 6 parts, but in the interest of time, I will skip the first 3, the objective, the scope, and methodology part, and I will dwell on the historical background, the liberalizing, the insurance sector, prospects and challenges, the Ethiopian case, and the road ahead. I will only dwell on the last 3 parts. As you know it very well, Ethiopia appears unique compared to its East African neighbors like Kenya, Tanzania, and the others in the sub-Saharan Africa region, in that it has not yet opened its insurance sector for foreign participation, and the country prefers to follow closed-door policy, and the effort has isolated the country from the rest of the world, and the impact of globalization is not felt to date. When we see the brief historical background of the Ethiopian insurance industry, again, for the sake of simplicity, I have divided. Ethiopia's the formal financial system is underdeveloped as measured by major KPIs, and the traditional system of Ekub and Edir are perhaps centuries old, but continue to play a vital role in Ethiopia's finance system. When we see the informal insurance in Ethiopia, we Ethiopians are known for cooperation, risk sharing, mutual support, and at times of grief or work. And we have traditional, informal, community-based insurance services and mechanisms such as Edir, which is a funeral society. And these Edirs gradually evolved to serve for the living as well as the dead. And we also have financing and jointly working schemes like Ekub, Dabo, Maradaja, Mahabar, and others, though the naming differs in different parts of the country. But quantifying the magnitude of funds held in these traditional informal systems is very difficult, but they have widest coverage than banks and insurers. When we see the modern history of insurance in Ethiopia, it dates back beyond 100 years, but for simplicity, I have divided it under 3 regimes: the 1976 and before the Derg regime and the post-1991 regime. When we see the characteristics of these regimes, during the imperial regime, the insurance sector was highly dominated by foreigners. The leadership, ownership, and even service consumption was highly dominated by foreigners, and foreign ownership was allowed, and there were many players, up to 13 insurers at the end of the regime, and supervisions, sometimes it was under the then Ministry of Commerce and Industry, and later under State Bank or National Bank of Ethiopia. During the Derg regime, the sector was totally closed, and the only company operating in the industry is only Ethiopian Insurance Corporation, and it was totally closed for foreigners and domestic private players, but still the supervision was under National Bank of Ethiopia. When we see the post-1991 government, again, Ethiopia's financial sector remains closed and it's much less developed than its neighbors. it's allowed for local private investors, but and the privately owned insurance companies have penetrated the financial market, and they sliced the market share of Ethiopian Insurance Corporation from 100% to 35% as at 30th June 2018, and it's characterized by, again, prohibitions. National Bank Proclamation 746 2012, a proclamation to provide for insurance business states, foreign nationals or organizations fully or partially owned by foreign nationals may not be allowed. Again, when we see the sector in major, again, the relinquishing effort on November 10, 2016 also has witnessed another issue, and in a policy reversal, the National Bank of Ethiopia has issued a new directive to all financial institutions, instructing that all shareholders with foreign citizenship should return their share certificates. Again, this has limited the Ethiopian diaspora community that has been and continues to be a major source of foreign revenue for the country. And now Ethiopian companies have to verify their shareholder citizenship and enforce the NB's directives. Again, supervision is under National Bank of Ethiopia, and the government is not paying much attention to the sector. When we see the first GTP plan and the second GTP plan, there is no clear plan regarding the insurance sector strategy, and there is no green light even regarding liberalizing the sector. When we see the good sides of the sector, though Ethiopia's financial sector remains closed and is much less developed than its neighbor, the current performance has witnessed that the dominance of the private players is increasing and the share of state-owned insurer is gradually decreasing, showing the increasing trend of public trust for the private sector. And the sector still attracts new entrants due to low entry barriers, low capital requirement, untapped potential market, and annual growth and profitability. The market is highly characterized by market concentration. The top three performers, Ethiopian Insurance, Niala Insurance, and Awash Insurance, they constitute 52% of the market share. The combined top 8 constitute the 80%, and the combined top 10 constitute 85%. And the market is highly constrained, and it's concentrated. The share of EIZ from the private sector is also less than 20%, and its life business share is 27%. Though detailed research is required to determine whether the state-owned insurer is underperforming relative to private insurers, the market share is showing decline. And EIC's major portfolio is coming from government mega projects where real competition cannot be ensured. When we summarize the performance of the insurance industry, it's characterized by 70 insurers with low penetration and density, 8 insurance specialists in non-life. The density is 57.02 per or USD 2.2. The penetration rate is less than 1%, 0.43. The branch to population ratio is 1 to 206,000. When we see other market characteristics, there is inadequate tax incentive, even in purchasing life insurance products. There is a perceived credibility crisis. There is overdependence on traditional insurance products and distribution channels. And the total number of branches are around cities. 53.9% were located in Addis Ababa, and their capital is very low. The general insurance, again, dominates the sector, and life insurance is at very low level of development. There are 6,352 employees, 532 branches, and 57 brokers. And in the interest of time, I should skip some of my slides to meet the time requirements. But all my slides show that in major comparisons, the sector is performing below its neighbors. For instance, let's see some of the pointers. When we see the penetration rate, the world average penetration, insurance penetration is 6.2%. 6.2%. The penetration rate in the African average is 2.8, The penetration rate in Kenya is close to 3%, but in Ethiopia, as we have seen, it is 0.43. In South Africa, it's 14%. When we see the density, the world is average is 662 USD. The African average is 61 USD. In Kenya, it's 39 USD, and in South Africa, it's 924 USD. But in Ethiopia, we have seen it's less than 3 USD. The share of life to non-life, the world, in the life sector constitutes 55.6%. In Africa, it constitutes 66.4% because of South Africa. In Kenya, it constitutes about 35.4%. In South Africa, it constitutes about 81%, but in Ethiopia, it's 5.5%. All these figures show the low level of development of insurance in Ethiopia. Even in terms of gross written premium, it's 280 million. As at 2017, as at 2018, June 30, it's around 280 million. But in Kenya, even it's like 2 billion USD. You can see the difference. When we see the life to non-life ratio, again, I have mentioned it before. It's very low in Ethiopia. When you see the utilization of technology, it's also very low. Most of the insurance companies are operating manually or computer assisted, characterized by unavailability of data, information, no information exchange platforms among insurers. Even in the HR development, there is a very high problem. Even in terms of global rating, no insurance company in Ethiopia is rated. No insurer in Ethiopia ever tried even passing through such credit ratings except Ethiopian Insurance effort in 2004 with the support of AIO. No insurance company is rated, and we don't know their status and their performance. When we go to sorry for the interruptions. I have to skip most of my slides to meet the time requirement. But the question is, why the sector is closed for foreign operators? Most pressure groups argue for or against privatization. All of these schemes have advantages and pitfalls. But when we see some of the prospectus, it's not working, sorry. When we see the experience of neighboring countries, and okay. Even for the regulator, if we open the market, if we liberalize the market, the entry of foreign insurers, through financial liberalization, may improve the supervisory regulatory organ through regulatory spillover. Entry of foreign insurers in emerging markets that are healthier than domestic operators, it allows the country to import stronger prudential regulation. The entry of foreign insurers may also contribute towards introducing better insurance products and services. With liberalization, there will be skill, knowledge, technology, and improvements, and will have positive impact on the labor market. The entry of foreign insurers may have positive effects on inbound skill. And when you go to the challenges part, By the same token, liberalizing the sector carries certain economic risks and uncertainties, some of which are consistent with the stakeholders' concerns. Financial liberalization may cause financial fragility rather than financial stability unless the regulatory framework is strengthened. This is especially true in developing countries when the regulator's capacity is weak. Privatization in transition and developing economies ended up transforming public assets onto the balance sheets of foreign companies and into the coffers of politically connected individuals or businesses under the shoddy deals. And under the pretext of liberalizing the sectors, countries replaced state monopoly with private monopoly. These are some of the challenges. And it's also important to note that liberalization has its own winners and losers. Okay, let me go to the conclusion and recommendation part. Sorry, I have more than 200 slides, but I have to skip. Sorry, it's not working. Okay, when we come to the final part, the sector is low, at low level of development as witnessed by low penetration density, product variety and relevance, accessibility, knowledge and skill. And the market is not competitive and the industry is strangled by structural problems. There are no encouraging efforts to develop it from within, so why we opt to close the sector. After all these years, we are using old rate charters and we don't have any technology to assess risk. We don't have a single actuary. Our insurance academy is not almost inexistent. We don't have prudent underwriters, qualified practitioners. We are operating manually, so why we opt to close the sector? We are selling homogeneous products. Unhealthy competition is there. Please, can you skip? Why is that government is contemplating to liberalize, privatize the insurance industry, while thinking of privatizing its crown jewels like Ethiopian Airlines and Ethiopian Telecom, which relatively contribute to the better to the government, and the practice and policies we follow must be validated. Even with the interviews I conducted with officials and decision makers, I couldn't get satisfactory answers to justify the cause. And my recommendations. My recommendation is intended to draw the attention of the policymakers toward this privatization or liberalization of the insurance sector. Liberalization of the insurance industry could be a panacea for addressing structural problems of the industry that hampered its growth and development. Ethiopia can improve the environment for economic growth if it developed policies that promote successful financial development and liberalization instead of adamantly resisting liberalization. With liberalization, modern insurance services can be introduced, more jobs can be created, and sector's contribution to the national economy and GDP can be enhanced. We have repeatedly tried financial and other reforms, and we are not registering the expected results. Let's stop singing the same, let's stop doing it the same way, and, insurance services does not have its citizenship. The country is in need of better, efficient, and modern services. As a priority, government can start liberalizing the insurance industry even prior to the banking sector. The lessons and experiences obtained from the insurance sector can be later used for the banking sector. And the entry modes can be sector-wise. We can start from the life and health or micro-insurance sector, or from other specific areas, or we can start with partial ownership by limiting the percentage of foreign ownership, as per the experience of other countries, or government should reduce its 100% ownership on the state-owned Ethiopian insurance. And my recommendation on the fate of Ethiopian insurance is, in the immediate run, it should revalidate its mission, and the state-owned insurer EIC to ensure its existence through providing strategic insurance products is a feasible option as to me, and it should see the blue ocean, and the EIC should walk away from the competing over motor and other urban-based insurance products on the red ocean side and navigate on the untapped side of the ocean. And it should reassess its mission. And I generally recommend agricultural insurance or micro-insurance or takaful insurance or other community-based health insurance or life insurance as areas that EIC can dwell on. And the EIC should marshal its resources for the development of the life insurance in Ethiopia. These are some of my recommendations, and thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Fikru, for your presentation. Scarcity is our intimate friend. It is always with us, and no technical problems are here. And as he promised from the title itself, he has delivered the things, and then the history of insurance in Ethiopia. In that cases, he has mentioned our indigenous insurance such as that, which is, I am very happy of that. And then the challenges and the prospectus, and finally he has recommended, even if there are lagunas or perforations in the presentation, we are going to fill in question and answer session. And then in order to save time, I'm immediately move to the next presenter, Dr. Paschal, and his title is Sustainability of Africa's Financial Service Sector through Human Capital and Digital Know-how. And very dynamic terms are here, very important: sustainability, financial service, human capital, and digital. And I hope that we are going to have a lot of takeaways from his presentation. And Doctor, you have 15 minutes. You can continue.
Is this working?
Yeah, not working? Yes, sir.
It's of any use. Yes. Right. Very good morning, and thanks for having me. As the moderator indicated, my name is Paschal Anosike, and I'm an academic and a researcher with the University of Wolverhampton in England. But before I joined the academic community, I worked with Standard Chartered Bank within the investment and wealth creation executive. So what I would like to share with you is a combination of my experience as a former banker and also what I do within the academic community. I'm the director of the Center for African Entrepreneurship and Leadership, and by that role, I do a lot of work with banks and insurance companies through catalyzing and also scaling up new startups, mainly in Africa. We have reached, as I speak, about more than 10,000 SMEs about 15% of whom are probably working with banks in some way or another. So what I have found in dealing with not just groups, but also individuals such as, not just individuals, but also groups such as banks, there's what I call a dearth of knowledge, skills, and experience around what I call digital innovation within the financial services sector. And I have to say, friends, I am not an expert in this area. I'm not an economist, or am I a financial analyst? So what you hear from me is what I call a baseline assessment of the sector across the continent. But I'll be, of course, drawing from what I know within East Africa. So with that, what I would like to share is to probably put into context where we are as a continent. We cannot be talking about digitalizing without understanding, if you like, where we are in terms of account holders. How many people within the continent actually have an account, actually interact with either insurance companies or banks? And if you look at where Africa is, you get a sense how it compares or how it shares with other parts of the world. So if you look up with the light blue, that's about 0.19% of the population. Globally, 69% of the global population adults have an account. If you edge a little bit closer down, you see that 20 to 39% of the population have an account. And that is probably, if you look at the Africa map, that is probably where majority of Africa sits, where we have less than 40% of the population having an account. That's quite telling. If you then compare that to other parts of the world where you have shaded green, I beg your pardon, blue, you get a sense that 64, 65, up to 90% in some cases of the population have an account. So in Africa, you're looking at Southern Africa, edging towards South Africa, Namibia. So you go up to Mauritius. Then if you look at some parts of Eastern Africa, Kenya is doing relatively well, but we'll look at that. Ethiopia is an interesting case. Ethiopia is very much at the bottom of the ranks, if you like. If you then look at what I call mobile money, because you have people that have traditional accounts, but increasingly over the last 10, 15 years, due to globalization, but more importantly, technology, what you're finding is that Africa has almost, in many cases, overtaken the rest of the world in terms of mobile account holders. So average across the world is 11% growth year on year. But in Africa, we're doing 12.5% growth year on year in terms of people that have mobile accounts. And of course, one can understand why. In terms of mobile penetration, in terms of mobile consumption, if you like, Africa, more than the rest of the world, consumed mobile telecommunication faster or more than any other country, than any other continent. And the reason is quite very, very self-explanatory. Unlike other parts of the world, in terms of what I call the landline or the traditional telephone as we know it, was very, very much limited in Africa. So with the explosion of telecommunication, telemobile communication, of course, Africa jumped on it. But also we are the youngest continent, if you like, meaning that majority of African population are probably we come within what I call the digital population. Just to put that into context, on average, the average age in the continent is about 19.2 years old. Globally, it's 26.9 years old. In Europe, Europe is an aging population. It's 42.8 years old. So you would expect that more population here probably will be consuming mobile, if you like, telephony services. But in terms of accounting, what is interesting, what I have found, is that although there are many account holders who have mobile accounts or whatsoever, but you have to put into context how many of such accounts are actually active. if you like, in terms of their utility value or utility ratio. And this is where I am interested in. That's where my interest lies. Because if you look at why Africa should actually be looking inwards, if you look at in terms of, let's just think in terms of the economies of scale, particularly in terms of job creation, over the next 10, 15 years, more than any other continent, African countries will create more jobs. Meaning that there will be more and more people, many, many more people in the continent needing financial services. As a sector, are you guys really ready? That's the question. So if you look at places like Nigeria, they will be creating about more than 27 million jobs over the next 10 years. If you look at places like South Africa, the same thing. If you look at a country like Kenya, they will create far more jobs than the UK, than even Germany. It means that a lot of people will need the sort of services that financial services sector actually provides. So there's every reason to be probably, if you like, much more innovative, much more positive. But if you look in terms of the state of the art within the sector, it tells a very different story. Then we have to be sanguine. We have to really reflect in terms of what we're doing. If you look at the adult population that have an account, 72% of which are men, and less than, if you like, 66% are actually women. But I would like to draw attention to what is actually happening within Africa. Globally, 7% of adults who are supposed to be having an account are probably not having an account. Whereas in Africa, that average is actually much higher at 9%. If you also look in terms of the 60% of the world's richest economies, 74% of the population do have an account. If you then look at the 40% of the poorest population, and I have to say, out of that 40%, 80%, if not more, of that 40% economics are in Africa. 61% of the population actually have an account. In other words, actually have interacted with financial services or products in any shape or form. That is serious. If you edge further down in terms of the female population that have an account, within that population that is 61%, you find out that more women are not actually accessing financial services or products in any shape or form. And there is also another population which I call the bottom of the pyramid, the informal sector. How do you access them, if you like? So that leads me to ask, as a continent and as a people, are we a cash-based society? Are we really ready culturally to engage with the sort of innovation that is happening across the sector? If you put some of the things that I have here in context, you get a sense of where some of the countries lie, particularly in East Africa. I'm interested in Ethiopia. If you look at Ethiopia, there's almost but nothing around mobile account holders. Not just in terms of banking, but even more so in terms of insurance. So they have not actually tapped into their neighbor, Kenya, that's actually doing very, very well in terms of mobile accounting. They have not been able to do that. And I was listening to the last speaker. He had some of the fascinating data that I am coming across in terms of why the sector is actually closed in Ethiopia. And Ethiopia is interesting. In the next 10, 15 years, about 5 countries in Africa will join the G20. By population, Ethiopia is very much placed to do that. Ethiopia is the second largest population in Africa, after Nigeria. So it really needs to look at itself in terms of what the sector is actually delivering. Because without financial services and without financial products, it's actually difficult to see how the economy can grow, if you like, how the economy can innovate. If you also look in terms of mobile services, again, some interesting stories are coming out. Botswana is actually at the end of it, at the top end of things. They are doing really, really well. But having said all this, of course there are challenges. You have to understand why some of these things are happening. If you look at our AGI, our development index, it's a whole bunch of stuff. It tells you why probably places like Ethiopia are not really doing well, if you like. But despite the challenges, there are some, if you like, glimmer of hope. I strongly believe that the sector needs to look at how they can provide knowledge, provide skills, provide probably, or use experience to penetrate the sector. And that has to do in terms of both service ends, if you like. So both people who are working in the sector and also consumers. How do you educate them? How do you reskill? How do you upskill people? How do you create awareness? How do you sensitize people, if you like? And that takes me to my final point, which is financial inclusion. How do you achieve that? That is important. I've taken a few, if you like, points in terms of MFIs. I'm sure you guys know all of that. In terms of mobile financial services, I'm sure you guys know all of that. What I would like to draw on is the agribusiness sector. It's an important sector in Africa, agribusiness. We have a whole bunch of people within the agribusiness sector that are not accessing the financial services, if you like, or products in any shape or form. How do we educate them? How do we integrate them, if you like, within that sector? The sector itself, of course, have to also look at itself, not just in terms of agent-principal relationship. Because what we are finding now, and I'm sure most of you know what I'm about to talk about, you have a situation because of innovation, because of technology, because of all of this stuff, where banks are having to interact with third parties to provide services, if you like. That is happening in places like Kenya. We're already seeing that. That presents a whole lot of challenges to banks. How do you monitor, manage what I call digital identities of individuals? How do you curate data? How do you even, if you like, collect data and also conserve the data? So these are things, if you like, the sector has to, if you like, think about to make people a lot more comfortable. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Doctor, and I thank you, Doctor, for his explosive, and again, he's lecturing, and he has mentioned a lot of things, and then he has showed us different directions, probably to be followed, and thank you for this one, and then I hope that likewise we are going to complete the presentation by question and answer, and I go immediately to the next presenter, Dr. Richard, yeah.
Thank you very much. There we go. Great. Some slides, please. Great. Good morning, everyone. It's very nice to be back in Addis Ababa and to be able to address you all. I come from a company called Genesis Analytics. We're a strategy consulting firm based in Nairobi and Johannesburg, and we've been working with clients in the financial sector on financial inclusion for the last 20 years. So what I'd like to do this morning is just give you a very quick overview of the recent developments in the financial inclusion landscape over the last 2 or 3 years, which should inform your deliberations here in Addis Ababa. My presentation is broken into 4 sections: brief update on the players, some of the trends, something about the funders, and then what are the key developments as we see it for the next couple of years. I think this statement sums up what we have achieved and where we are in financial inclusion, coming from the World Bank Global Findex database, which the previous speaker was also referencing. And what they're really telling us here is that financial inclusion is actually far less about what the banks have been doing than what the telecommunications companies, the mobile network operators or MNOs, have been doing. That virtually all the progress in financial inclusion over the last 5 years has been made by the investments the MNOs have made in mobile money. And this is really a very interesting finding and a very pertinent finding for Ethiopia, given the state of your telecommunications industry. And so our observation here is that progress in financial inclusion is entirely dependent on progress in the telecommunications industry. You need to have a modern, privatized telecommunication infrastructure that delivers high-quality access to the network at affordable prices for the bulk of population for you to make progress in financial inclusion. There's not a country in Africa which has made progress in financial inclusion without this bedrock of the liberalized and effective telecommunications industry. And that is both the results from the network coverage, the quality of the network, and the pricing of access to that network. So 3 things there, the quality of the network, but also the pricing. If USSD is priced by a monopoly, it becomes too expensive for people to use the financial services we'd like them to use. If the monopoly in the telecommunications industry prices their service to customers differently to what a bank can price, the banks cannot compete in that space. And finally, is the telecommunications operator allowed to provide mobile money services? In Africa, we've seen 2 countries that stand aside from this rule. Nigeria, where the regulator prevented the MNOs from offering mobile money services, with the result that there's been very little progress in financial inclusion in Nigeria. In South Africa, the regulator did not prevent the MNOs from offering the services, but because the banking sector was already so developed, there was little need for people to use mobile money services. In South Africa, we have something like 400,000 point-of-sale devices. We have over 30,000 ATM in the country for a population which is a third the size of Ethiopia's. So if we then look at the key issues in financial inclusion, it's all been driven by innovation. And as far as we're concerned, there are 5 key innovations that have dominated the market. The first one I've already spoken of, the importance of mobile money, which is very much driven by the network operators. The second area of innovation is what we call MPOS, or mobile POS, and micro-acquiring. These are investments and attempts by different companies to replace the traditional point-of-sale device at a merchant with a cheaper way of completing a transaction. And the main focus here is on the so-called QR codes, those funny kind of black and white codes. And I think we already have in Ethiopia a deployment by one of the banks who's sponsoring the conference, which uses QR codes. So these have been incredibly important in the Asian markets, have not yet had much of an impact in African markets, but because they transform the cost of acquiring a transaction, they are really quite an important innovation. The next innovation that's really important and has been a game changer is what we call microcredit. This is very different to microfinance. This is using data and analytics to come up with new and innovative ways of scoring customers to allow financial institutions to make loans to them in a way that they previously would not have been willing to do so. And again, the core of these products are linked to the mobile network operator data. So the leading product in this space is something called Mshwari in Kenya, but it's been replicated in many countries. And this has really brought more credit to more Kenyans in 3 years than microfinance has delivered to Kenyans over 20 years, with an enormous amount of donor support in the microfinance industry. So a very important area, but an area which is unlikely to make much progress until you get the kind of richness of data that comes from a deep and effective telecommunications sector. The next and equally transformative innovation has been agency banking. The banks that have been successful with agency banking across the continent have been able to reduce their cost-to-income ratio by up to 20%. So whereas your banks in Ethiopia are sitting with cost-to-income ratios above 60%, the leading banks in Kenya with agency banking networks are operating at about 43%. So agency banking has been transformative in terms of allowing, getting banking closer to customers, transforming the cost of servicing customers from low-income markets, and transforming the costs of delivering banking service. So a very important innovation that is still very much in its infancy here in Ethiopia. And then finally, there's been a lot of investment in the remittance environment to try and reduce the cost for remittances. This is happening, but has less dramatic impact. If we look at some of the trends in the market, I think the core trend we see at the moment is mobile money expanding from being originally a person-to-person payment, sending money either from myself to a relative up country or paying someone next to me for goods and service, to a whole range of financial products built on the mobile, what we call the mobile rails. And you can see in this slide just the range of services that are now being delivered through their mobile money accounts. So this is all the benefits you get if you have this cheap, low-cost wallet at the heart of your financial system, which is where most of countries in Africa are. We're also now seeing the telcos that have been so successful in mobile money saying that they too want to become banks. So we know MTN has said they're going to become a bank, and we know Orange has already created a bank in some countries and intends to launch banks in other countries. So the MNOs have moved from being purely involved in telecoms to getting involved in financial services to the point that they're now applying for banking licenses. This slide also shows how concentrated the telecommunications market is in Africa. So we've got 3 or 4 players that dominate across the continent, all of which, or most of which, have made some indication of their desire to become banks in the near future. So we've got a situation where telcos have become dominant in financial inclusion, and now they want to move into the banking space and are key to some of the innovation trends. If we look more broadly at innovation, the one way of understanding innovation is to just look at the dimensions on the internet. How often is a word mentioned in Google searches? And this chart I pulled off yesterday from Google Trends, and it shows how fintech became a very important search topic about 3 or 4 years ago, but has to some extent stabilized. We've seen a bit of a peak recently, but it does look like this is a trend that's run its course. We can also see that cryptocurrencies achieved a lot of popularity, but are now really waning in interest and popularity. And if you're interested in that, there was a very good survey The Economist published a couple of months ago on cryptocurrencies. What we're now seeing is that disruption is coming less from the so-called fintechs, but from the so-called big techs. So the real changes in the market are driven not by small, innovative fintech companies, but by what Safaricom is doing, a big MNO, what Alibaba is doing in China, what WeChat is doing in China. So the main disruption now in financial services is coming not from breakaway, innovative small firms, but from these very, very large internet platforms. And you can just imagine what would happen today if I could use WhatsApp, which thankfully I can now use in Ethiopia, to make a payment to anyone else in the world who had a WhatsApp account. And that is really what I think everyone is focused on in financial inclusion, how WhatsApp and WeChat become the future payments engines in the market. As I mentioned, fintechs are, I think a couple of years ago, fintechs were seen very much as the disruptors. The fintech companies were going to take over the banks. What we now see is a recognition that fintechs need to work with banks and to combine their strengths. And so most of the fintechs are now either being purchased by banks or merging with banks or selling their services to banks rather than competing with banks as standalone entities. If we look at the funding environment, the funding in financial inclusion is quite well documented, and it tends to go into these kind of 5 buckets. Capacity building for financial services. At some point, this was the major focus of financial inclusion funders. I think IFC, for instance, was spending almost 3 billion a year providing loans to financial institutions linked into technical assistance. interventions to support policy reform, development of digital financial services, development of the payment infrastructure, and financial literacy. And the arrows give you some sense of how those different funding buckets are evolving. So at the moment, there's a lot of funding going into digital financial services and in terms of building payments infrastructure. And certainly when we look at Ethiopia, payments infrastructure is really, really critical. Who gets the most financial inclusion funding? Well, Africa. We get a good 30%, and I think that's probably rising. How much funding is going into Africa? Well, between 2005 2016, the funding rose quite dramatically. 2016, the most recent data indicated about $4.7 billion being sent on financial inclusion, going to the countries as shown on the slide. Oops. If we look at the composition of funding, it really has changed quite a lot. Whereas you would expect funding to flow almost down the columns on the slide, we now see funding flowing left and right and diagonally across this. So we have funding from the foundations being channeled through the multilaterals, from the multilaterals into private equity, from private equity into fintechs and into banks and into MNOs, as well as bilateral monies being funded into each of these different buckets. So there's no clear direction in the funding. It's pretty much all over the show, but that slide gives you the sense of the players. Just some final slides on new directions. This is a slide from a supermarket in Kenya, and this is showing you how M-Pesa has gone from a person-to-person payment platform to really a dominant merchant payment platform. These are all the tills, and you can see every till has got a Lipa na M-Pesa number, and people are paying for all their goods at the teller using the M-Pesa. So this is really how fast the mobile money has evolved in Kenya. The other area which is attracting a lot of interest at the moment and getting an increasing number of funding is selling assets that have embedded SIM cards and can use the M-Pesa platform for repayment. So this is the so-called pay-as-you-go solar, a really important development which is now getting a lot of funding. And then my final slide, the real question going forward is the role of the smartphone. When you have an environment where feature phones are dominant, as you have in Ethiopia, the MNOs are really the only players that can effectively drive financial inclusion. When you have an environment where everyone has a smartphone, which increasingly will be the case by 2025 across Africa, including Ethiopia, it's a very different environment and a lot more players can participate. So as you liberalize your economy, these are going to be very interesting trends to watch. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard, for your compact and rich presentation. And then directly I go to the next presenter. Yodahe? Yodahe? Right. Therefore, Yodahe, the title is the role of national identity system and public-private value-added services. So this is a new thing, and you have 15 minutes.
Hello, I'm Yodahe from the Office of the Prime Minister, from the Technology Advisory Team. Today I'm going to give a brief presentation on what the Ethiopian government is doing and our understanding that we're lagging behind in e-commerce compared to other East African countries or the whole of Africa, and what the government is planning to do. Especially with regards to e-commerce, and what has to happen before e-commerce is giving a unique identity to every individual for individualized services to flourish. There has to be a way of having a properly functioning identification system, and that's one of the priority areas of the government. So I'm going to present to you what's being done with regards to creating a national identity system, and then the other activities that follow, such as the e-commerce. Currently, as you may know, the Ethiopian identity system is called the Qabale ID, which every citizen by proclamation is supposed to have. It has so many drawbacks, such as no central registry. Each Qabale is like a county, it's a small administrative unit. So each unit manages its own small paper-based database. There's no guarantee for uniqueness. It's susceptible to fraud. It's not easy to obtain. The bureaucracy and corruption is tied to it. There's, of course, as it's paper-based, it can easily be forged and altered. There is zero deduplication. I can, if I want, go to different regions and then acquire as many identifications as I want. So a single person can have multiple identities. So all these issues have forced the government to consider having a uniform identification system. And there was a project office running since 2011 up until a few months ago to have a working national identification system. Currently, this mandate is being championed by the Ministry of Peace, under which there is an agency, the Vital Events Registration Agency. So the national identity data, the population database, is the ownership of that database belongs to them. From the Prime Minister's office, as well as from the Ministry of Innovation and Technology, there is an effective facilitation work being done. There are a few cities here and there, such as Addis Ababa and other cities in Ethiopia, who have started to issue smart or digital ID cards. As I said before, the Qabale ID is the most important form of personal identification, and there are about 16,000 administrative units, the Qabales, in Ethiopia. So it gives legal identity and allows individuals to conduct public or private transactions, including if someone wants to open a bank account, that's the first thing that they're required to have. So that's the basis for financial inclusion. This is the architecture we are planning to arrive at. There is civil registry, the Vital Events Registry Agency has birth, marriage, divorce, days, all these civil registrations happening. And then there is a biometric capture, the 10 prints, the iris data, the photographs, and all that will be input into a civil registry and a biometric database respectively. And those two will centrally be put inside a national population database. And that database can be, different stakeholders can plug into that database. It can be the public sector for public services, it can be the financial sector, it can be telecom service providers, anyone. Third parties can also access this. And lucky enough, we have an upcoming election in Ethiopia, and that's the voter registration process is what we are planning to piggyback on as far as creating a national ID, national identity system is concerned, because there are about 50 million voters, expected voters in the coming 1 year. So we can have both voter registration and national ID registration at the same time. That's what we're planning to do. So to be able to get both the demographic and the biometric data that we need in the coming few months, this is the best way to go forward. There are other African countries from whom we are drawing experiences from. For example, Ghana. Ghana has already done something similar in their last election, where there was an electronic voter registration, and then they were able to create a population database based on that. There is a recent example of Zimbabwe's election whereby they used biometric voter registration. There are other African countries. Kenya, in their last election, have also had biometric voter registration, and that would be a very important step for to creating a digital identity. We also have an upcoming national census that will also be a very important input to create this, this much wanted national identity system. For the moment, they only will gather demographic and spatial data, like the location of every household. There's no biometric data with the census, but with the upcoming election and voter registration, we plan to collect biometric data to be able to start the national identity or the digital identity platform. When we're considering other existing databases, identity databases that are available in our country, we have looked at the bottom-up approach, whereby there are small databases here and there, such as the Federal Police, National Immigration, Vital Events, Ethiopian Revenues and Customs Authority, and other authorities have collected demographic and biometric data. So it's a very good way to start the bottom-up approach of integrating all these databases and having a central national database. So for this, the government has formed an executive committee to oversee and synergize all these different institutions. The Office of the Prime Minister, Ministry of Peace, Ministry of Innovation, Central Statistics, and the Independent National Election Board are involved in this. The mission is to synergize the civic registration, event registration projects so that it can be leveraged by the national identity, elections, and other national projects. The operation, we are going to have to deliver results within 1 year. So it's on a very tight timeline. There's a technical committee which is under the executive committee, and it mirrors the same institutions. The civil enrollment in the country with both biometric and demographic inputs necessarily for the National Civil Registry. And then we recently formed a program office to oversee the national identity system. There are other institutions in scope. With the upcoming Ethio Telecom is to be privatized, as you may know, and there's going to be more competition coming in. So telecom is going to play a very important role in the identity, with regards to digital identity. There are other government agencies that I have not mentioned earlier, and development partners and small and micro enterprise are also part of these institutions that are in scope. So we have, as I said earlier, we have an upcoming election, and with that we plan to gather biometric and demographic data to form our population database. And that population database can be leveraged by both the financial sector and the public sector. And then we have upcoming census, and then the owner of this biometric and demographic data will be the old VERA or the new INVEA. It's called Immigration, Nationality and Vital Events Registration Agency. So the whole idea of forming these committees and this program office is to pool data, to pool resources. We have existing infrastructure. Ethio Telecom has 85% of data and voice coverage in Ethiopia. And there are other government networks such as the Woradanet. There are physical infrastructures that can be shared among these institutions such as the CAEL and the voting stations, health centers. And for data gathering, we have encoders and different encoding devices that are being procured by different government agencies. So having a unique and a working national identity system means there are countries that have had their national identity cards used as payment cards. It can be used as a social welfare card, insurance card, health insurance, voter registration, loyalty, driver's license, pensioner's card. So integrating all these services into one will actually let e-commerce and other activities flourish. So that's why we are focusing on having a national identity system. So one question we can consider is, given the importance of a proper identity system for the financial sector, we are very much interested in identifying what global or African precedents there are to let banks and other public-private partnership participate in this endeavor. And we are also trying to work towards the 2030 UNECA agenda of giving every African a digital identity and having that identity to be interoperable among African countries. So when we are working towards forming our own national identity system, we also have the UNECA's mission, the 2030 mission, in scope. So yeah, this is the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you this presentation. And then I personally believe that it is going to clean one of the dirtiest areas of our community, that means Kabale. And then anyway, in order to direct our questions, let me remind you the presenters. And then the first presenter is the title that the case of insurance sector, liberalization in Ethiopia, prospectus and challenges. Director goes to Fikru Tsegaye. Here, Fikru Tsegaye. The second presenter is sustainability of Africa's financial service sector through human capital and digital know-how. Dr. Paschal Anosike is there. And the third presentation goes to Richard Ketley, the role of financial inclusion to this, and the last question goes to this one. And then I am going to follow the usual way of allocating questions, and then I'm going to give chance for 3 questions in this set, and likewise I'm going to do it that way. Question in this area? Hands? በዚህ አካባቢስ ጥያቄ? እሺ፣ 1 2 በዚህ አካባቢ የለም። 1 አለ። እሺ፣ 1 2 2 3 እሺ። በዚህስ? ኦኬ፣ እንዳረሳው እመጣለሁ። እሺ፣ ከዚህ ልጀምር። እዛ ኋላ አንድ ሰው። እሺ፣
ስለ እድሉ ስለተሰጠኝ አመሰግናለሁ። እኔ እንኳን መጠየቅ የምፈልገው አቶ ፍቅሩ ያቀረቡት ላይ ነው። ጥያቄ ምንድነው? በላይፍ ኢንሹራንስ ዙሪያ ላይ ኢናዱኬት ታክስ ኢንሴንቲቭ አለ ብለዋል። ይህ ነገር ግልጽ አልሆነልኝም። ቢኮዝ በላይፍ ኢንሹራንስ ለምሳሌ አንድ ሰው በሚሞትበት ጊዜ የሚከፈለው ዴዝ ቤኔፊት ሰማሾርዱ እንዳለ የዋስትናው መጠን ነው። ስለዚህ ከዛ ኢንካም ላይ እነዛ ቤኔፊሻሪዎች የሚያገኙት ኢንካም ላይ ምንም አይነት ታክስ አይቆረጥባቸውም። ስለዚህ እንደውም አዱኬት ቢባል አይሻልም ወይስ? ይሄንን እንደው ያብራሩልኝ ብዬ ነው። አመሰግናለሁ።
Thank you very much, all presenters. I have a questions on financial inclusiveness and innovation in financial sector. That is for Dr. Richard. Most of the financial inclusives are innovative based and telecom based, 90% you mentioned that. How do you implement the financial literacy within 90% of telecom based financial inclusives?
because it is challenging financial literacy of the population is it is not it is minimal too. How we are going to manage this financial inclusive out of the 90% telecom-based financial inclusive experience? This is my question for you. Fikru, you are mentioned liberalization is critical for the Ethiopian financial sector, especially the insurance sector. The Ethiopian government showed an interest to create a holding company. Basically, the public enterprises of Ethiopian government is trying to change these institutions to holding company. Is it better to maintain a holding company or liberalization of the financial sector? What is your comment? Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. I have two questions. It's for Fikru. I heard from the presentation that the closed financial system in Ethiopia has a good side. That was mentioned as less development is a good side of the closed financial service in the market. So what does it mean by the good side? You took this closed system as a good side for the financial service. And also, even though I couldn't follow I couldn't catch your recommendations, but one point attracted my attention, that AIC has to change its mission. AIC has to get out of the urban and the urban insurance and also the motor insurance. Rather, it has to focus on the micro insurance and agricultural products. So do you mean that AIC has to change its objectives also? That means it's a profit-making organization. So if AIC focus only on micro insurance and the other agricultural products, so it will run with less liquid, and then it needs a budget allocation from government. So you mean that AIC has to change its objective? I want to his explanation on these two questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll try to make my questions in English because some of the presenters may not comprehend Amharic. So my questions will directly go to most of the presenters. Like, I'm concerned about financial inclusion. I mean, how inclusive will be the financial inclusion modality, especially in the country, like in countries like Ethiopia, where most of the population lives in the rural area, and even in urban areas, people who depend on like other people who have access to finance, because we hear on media that in America people are not going with money, which we often say finance. So in the future, like money was not there before and may not be there in the future, as we see. Yesterday I raised a question, but the question was not well addressed as I felt, because the panelists took my example, not my question, to respond to my question. So in this case, I feel like we're going to be under a control of the digital system. I don't know who will be controlling us. I don't know who will be controlling the financial system, where there would be no money, no paper money, no coin money. One of the presenters raised about cryptocurrency. I don't know what it does mean. And if we don't have money, why are we talking about money? Plus, we will be like the last presenter raised about this national identity. Nobody is talking about RFID. We'll go to the point where we'll not have an ID at hand, because ID might be inserted in our palm or somewhere, I don't know where they should put it. So are we really feasible in terms of talking about financial inclusion today? Would we be talking tomorrow, after tomorrow? I'm talking about in terms of years maybe, because the digitization system is going faster than we anticipate. So are we going to be financially included in all aspects? Are we going to be include all the people in the rural areas? Or would there be a possibility that we can skip some of the stages that the world has gone through? Thank you very much.
አመሰግናለሁ። የመጀመሪያው ጥያቄ ለአቶ ፍቅሩ ነው። ያው እንደሚታወቀው የፋይናንስ ሴክተሩ ኢንሹራንስን ጨምሮ ለውጭ ኢንቨስተርስ የተፈቀደ አይደለም። ነገር ግን የባንኪንግ ሴክተርን ለመዝጋት ወይም ለተወሰነ ጊዜ ክሎዝድ ሆኖ እንዲቆይ ለማድረግ የተገለጹ ምክንያቶች አሉ። የኢንሹራንስ ሴክተሩን በተመሳሳይ ሁኔታ ለውጭ ኢንቨስተርስ ክፍት ላለማድረግ የተሰጡ ምክንያቶች በዚህ ጥናት ውስጥ ተለይተዋል ወይ? ከተለዩ እነዚህ ምክንያቶች አሁን ለመለወጥ የሚያስችል ቫሊድ የሆነ አርጊውመንት አለ ወይ? አንደኛው እሱ ነው። ሁለተኛ ሴክተሩ ይከፈት ስንል ሴክተሩ ከመከፈቱ በፊት ወይም ቢከፈት የሚያስከትላቸው ነገሮች በተገቢ ሁኔታ ማኔጅ ለማድረግ የሚያስፈልጉ ቅድመ ሁኔታዎች በጥናት ውስጥ ተካተዋል ወይ ለማለት ነው። ይቅርታ ፕሬዘንቴሽኑ በነበረ ጊዜ ስላልነበርኩ ምናልባት ተመልሶ ከሆነ ታረማለሁ። And my second question is for Mr. Richards. Almost the achievements, all of the achievements in financial inclusion came from the digital financial inclusion, like in which have been driven the banking system or in the payment system. So can you show us or tell us similar success stories in the inclusive insurance services? Thank you.
አመሰግናለሁ። For Dr. Richard and Paschal, yesterday there was an international summit. The EU's and AU and representative from Africa Union, Paul Kagame, remarked one statement in the summit. The summit was it's digitalizing the continent. And by the virtue of coincidence, we are talking about the same thing here. So you have had some short but interesting input about the Ethiopian financial sector, both the banking and the insurance. And from the presentation Mr. Fikru had, the insurance sector or the finance sector has got 100 years. After 100 years, we found the sector very infant, very rigid, die-hard of technology and dynamism, a very shallow return. With regard to knowledge, it's not only the Ethiopian insurance sector or banking sector, it's the problem of it's the problem of the continent itself. And we have seen some progress from your presentation in the South Africa and Eastern Africa. So where do you think that the starting point of digitalizing this very traditional sector? Mr. Fikru, I am very much interested about your topic, and it is the most hectic one, and it's the most interesting, not only from the financial sector perspective, but from the Ethiopian economic liberalization perspective. So I'm with your stand, and I need more liberalization to come in the financial sector. But from your conclusion side, you only refer to the Ethiopian Insurance Corporation. And liberalization, I think, is not only for giant firms, but it's all about the sector operators. And from your recommendation, from my knowledge and experience perspective, more financial inclusion can be addressed in the micro-insurance aspect. And that is not necessarily and seriously attached with the Ethiopian Insurance Corporation. Therefore, what was your study with the other private sector? And why not you recommend this for all other insurance companies? For Yodahe, first of all, I really appreciate to have such a young, energetic team of professionals in Prime Minister office, because it was expected the most gray hair around there. And could you please move on and address my question to the loved, dynamic, and visionary leader, His Excellency, Dr. Abiy, that less attention is given to the insurance sector. Not only less attention is given to the insurance sector, the momentum of change is crunched there. So if you want to more digitalize the financial sector, very particularly to the insurance sector, we have had a serious debate on the regulatory side, but the innovation side we need to discuss with our love leader. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. My question goes to Mr. Fikru. In your recommendation part, you said that you have recommended opening of the insurance market should come even first from the banking sector, the banking industry. It's a hard fact that the government closed the market, the financial markets, just to give grace period for those institutions to consolidate themselves in the area of capital, infrastructure, HRD, etc., etc. However, you said in your recommendation part, the insurance industry should open first instead of the banking sector. So what's the logic behind, or is there any empirical evidence that shows that support your recommendation? Thank you.
Thank you very much. My question is mainly directed at Yodahe, but I would appreciate the contributions of the other panelists as well. First off, I'd like to appreciate the initiative taken by the government in adopting an open data policy, making almost all government data open, and initiating an electronic signature and contracts law. This is a huge step in any movement towards digitization and electronic e-commerce and e-payment. I'd like to get a status update on how these instruments are proceeding, especially the open data policy and the electronic signature laws. My second question is on the national ID and other government data. I want to know what the government policy is towards protecting the privacy of its citizens. On the other hand, I also want to know how this data would be accessible to third parties. You mentioned that this data would be accessible by banks, financial institutions, and other third parties. I want to know how the government is intending to balance between these two. On this point, I'd like to get the thoughts of Richard and Paschal on the experiences from other African countries where government has been involved in issuing electronic IDs and making government data available to third parties, and how this can contribute to financial inclusion. Thank you very much.
Sorry. So the questions do have their own addresses, their own destinations. Therefore, the questions are going to be reacted accordingly. And then one message is given to give to the Prime Minister, then you are going to give. I hope that. And then the first reactor is Mr. Fikru, sorry.
Okay, thank you. I have received many questions, and I consider it as my presentation is the most clear presentation than the others. That's why I'm receiving much questions. Let me address the questions in the order of their appearance. Let me start from the question raised by Mr. Getachew. I can address you by your names because I know the questionnaires. Is it okay? Okay. Let me start with the question posed by Mr. Getachew. He said, you mentioned that there is no tax incentive in Ethiopian context, but what I was saying was there are different premium tax reliefs in other countries and other tax packages, including the one that you mentioned, in other markets. And providing these tax incentives enables the industry, the insurance industry, to encourage more insureds to come to buy life insurance products. Yes, you are right, but there are also other tax packages and tax reliefs, premium tax reliefs. Going to the second question, it's from Mr. Nazanet, and you mentioned less development as a good side of the Ethiopian insurance industry, but what I was mentioning was, as a good side, the private sector is growing in Ethiopia after 1991, after the liberalization of the domestic private sector. The domestic private share is increasing, and the share of EIC is declining, and this showed that the private sector, the private insurance companies are getting trust and confidence from the public. Previously, everybody was, transacting insurance with Ethiopian Insurance Corporation, but recently, the statistics show that people are going out to purchase insurance from other private insurance companies. That's why the share of EIC is 35% currently. That's one point. There is public confidence on the private sector. The second issue is there is untapped market potential in Ethiopia. I have mentioned the density is low, the penetration is low, the branch to population ratio is very low, and even considering the 100+ million population, the growth of life insurance is totally untapped. That is, the potential is, the prospect is also the good side. I mentioned these two on the good sides. The other question you raised was about the mission of Ethiopian Insurance. I mentioned EIC as a state-owned insurance company, as a government-owned insurance company, has to revalidate its purpose. It has to serve the majority. EIC is competing with the private sector. EIC is competing on the motor insurance, engineering insurance, and other insurance covers meant for the manufacturing or the other sector, to the commercial sector. But as a state-owned insurance, he has to work on micro-insurance. One person has also mentioned. Other insurance companies are working more on micro-insurance, agricultural insurance, even on the private sector. But although AIC provides such coverage, the effort coming from the AIC side is weak and minimal, as opposed to its ownership. It's a state-owned company. The other issue is, you said that AIC is a profit-making organization, and we don't bother about, working on financial inclusion and working on micro and other insurance products. But I mentioned AIC can work on micro insurance, agricultural insurance, because our economy is agrarian, and AIC should take the lead in serving the majority. That was my point. The other question was from Mr. Belay. Yes, in my presentation, I have presented regulatory concerns and oppositions to liberalizations from the government side. And one is, I can say, it's loss of control. The other issue is always National Bank and other concerned states, we first must strengthen the national capacity. We need to prepare our services. We need to build strong legal and regulatory framework. And there are also other issues mentioned by us, cautions from the government side. I have addressed them, but in the interest of I was not able to present all my presentations, but the concern of the government is addressed in my presentation. Mr. Asagid said, why you recommend agricultural insurance and other insurance products for Ethiopian Insurance Corporation only, but I recommended those products for all. I recommended life insurance. As I said, we have 100+ million population, but the share of life is very minimal. All should work on life insurance. We need to work on takaful insurance because 40% of the Ethiopian population is Muslim. We can have a good side to introduce takaful insurance. I have mentioned agricultural insurance and micro insurance because of the economic development and the economic nature of Ethiopia, because I believe that these products are more relevant to the majority of Ethiopians. Finally, Mola said there is a grace period from the government side, but yes, government is providing grace period, but the companies are not building their capacity. For how long are we expected to prolong that grace period? That's my question. As I said, even the GDP, the contribution of the insurance sector to the GDP is very minimal. The penetration rate is very low. Density is low. So what's next? They are not even. We don't have institutional capacity. We don't have training institutes. We are not building the capacity of our human resource. Even the fate of the Bank and Insurance Academy is questionable. We are not working on capacity building. But when is the expiry? The expiry date. And also I have mentioned that even in the GTP plan of government, GTP1, GTP2, insurance sector is barely addressed. This shows that the government is not providing the expected support to the insurance sector. Finally, I mentioned that it's better to start from insurance companies because banks, relatively speaking, banks are more strong, relatively speaking. Compared to the insurance companies, banks play much role to the government, but for instance, the government can open life insurance sector, can liberalize life insurance sector. The existing companies are not working much on it. Again, the sector is contributing less to the GDP compared to the banking sector. That's why I said, in terms of priority, government is thinking about, liberalizing Ethiopian Airlines, Ethio Telecom, and others. But they can also start from the insurance sector because they are not serving the majority as depicted by major key performance indicators that show the growth of an insurance industry. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think the last question the second to the last question in terms of where do we start with digitalization? And I will proceed in tandem with the gentleman who probably made a general comment to all of us in terms of financial inclusion. So a subset of that in terms of mobile financial services, I will leave for Richard to probably address. So there are several ways, in my view, in which we can box and coax. How do we start to digitalize, if you like? We can say the government can probably provide the landscape for that to actually happen through what I call incentive packages. Not so much in liberalizing the sector, but also putting what I call very robust regulatory regime in place to safeguard, if you like, financial services. And what I mean by that is, naturally, people are suspicious or cautious about consuming a product or service they don't know. If you don't understand how a food is made, or you don't understand what the menu is about, as a human being, you're reluctant to actually consume it. So the same is also true about financial products and financial services. If people don't understand how that will better their lives, or enhance their business, or improve their well-being, of course, there will be certain reluctance. And that is why I try to emphasize the idea of knowledge. How do you provide knowledge? How do you create awareness? How do you sensitize people to the benefits, but also the challenges? And I listened to the last speaker talking about capacity building. That is obviously lacking, because even within the sector itself, those who are providing some of these products and services are also unaware of the benefits and the, if you like, and the challenges of some of these products and services. So in terms of safeguarding in terms of how do we begin to digitalize and also begin to move towards financial inclusion. So government perhaps can play a role, but I also believe that the sector itself can actually design what I consider, if you like, a code of expectations or practice in terms of what they should provide, the limits in terms of what the services or products can actually do, if you like, not to oversell. But more importantly, they should also engage in what I call a campaign to sensitize the public, to make the public more aware and more open to some of the benefits of this. So there are 4 areas which we might consider in terms of how do we include people, how do we get people on board, how do we get people from underground to the overground. If you look at the era of microfinancial institutions, the so-called MFIs, which most of you know, it was heralded. It was seen as the panacea or the solution to what I call financial access poverty, where we have majority or millions of Africans not accessing any financial services or products in any shape or form, particularly those at the bottom of the pyramid, and more prominently women. How do we do that? And if you look at the range, this is 2018, going on to 2019, 21st century. About 24 to 27%, up to 78% in some places. 24, 27 in South Africa are not consuming financial services of any sort. 78 in countries like Mozambique. How do we get those people? How do we get them to enjoy the benefits of financial services products? Of course, education is key to that. How do we integrate, if you like, their life cycle? Everyone accesses what I call health services. It may not be health insurance, but people do have access to health. So how do we, through that mechanism, get people on board through, if you like, getting their identities, providing such services based on their ownership of accounts or financial services products? That is doable. In Europe, for instance, there are services which you cannot access if you don't have a bank account. If you don't have a simple bank account, you simply cannot access those services, including health. It's impossible. The second thing, it's if you look at what I call the agent-principal relationship. This is the feature of banking, whether traditional bankers like it or not. Insofar as people will continue to consume mobile telephony services, there would always be a case where bankers would interact with third parties. So that provides one axis of inclusion, if you like, whereby banks or insurance companies provide accelerators or enablers whereby people with mobile phones, smartphones, if you like, where the functionalities of those products can be reversioned to accommodate financial services products. But of course, that also comes with some risks, if you like. That is already happening. How do you supervise or monitor that sort of relationship? And I listened to the last speaker in terms of where he was talking about how do you manage people's data? That is important. Privacy is important. People want to know, would like to know how their data is used. For what purpose, by whom, and for what? People like to know that. So that is a key thing for the sector to probably figure out a mechanism by which to actually do that. And I believe, by the way, that a robust regulatory framework can also help to preserve that. So in terms of how the sector and the telecommunications sector, in terms of how they engage with what I call data capture, curation, querying, conservation, and preservation, and also utility. Who is using it? For what? So how do you monitor all of those cycles? That is important, so that when an individual goes to vote, goes to consume, if you like, health, goes to consume insurance services, goes to consume anything whatsoever, the data is consistent. You can easily tell someone in Adama who is claiming to be Mr. A, and the same person in Addis, or Bishop 2, or Mombasa, you can see their data, that this is the same person, if you like. Another area, it's distribution outlets. I think the time has gone. The time has gone whereby banks can begin to brag about having what I call POS, point of sale terminals, where you have all these cash points everywhere. That, in my view, does not mean inclusion. So we have to be asking ourselves, although even so, that is not sufficient. I listened to Richard saying in South Africa there are several hundred outlets, if you like. In places like Malawi, in places like Ethiopia, how many POS do we have where people can easily access all of these things? I don't know, if you like. But I think the real question is not in this POS. I think the real question is, how do we develop more inclusivity based on integrated offering, as I have mentioned? For instance, I know, Kenya can make all the noise they like to make, about championing, if you like, mobile accounts. It may not please your ears, Richard, but if you look at the data actually, how many of those accounts are actually active? And as a former banker, if my account is not active, it's not used within 3 months, then it's not active really. It's just there. So we have to look at that. So I believe that financial inclusion should be, in my view, or we have to redefine it, not just in terms of points of access of services, but in terms of the utility of the products or services, access to those. So be it savings, credit, or insurance. How is it used? What's the frequency, if you like? How do people engage with it? How do people interact with it? What are the demographics interacting with it? So those are things that probably research and policy, granularity, might probably help with. And I think the sector, not just the banking, but also insurance sector, because most bankers also provide insurance services. So there has to be a soul search in there. And on the final point, it's not sufficient, in my view, to consume, to be a consumer of financial services, products or services. I'm actually more interested in terms of the safeguarding. So how is my data protected? So my view in that, not just regulation, because we know in Africa, and this is true, by the way, in terms of digitalization, the court systems we have in Africa are not yet equipped. Europe is struggling. North America is struggling. Much more Africa. Even our basic court systems are not equipped for the sort of discussions we're having here. So it's not sufficient. So these are issues which probably we'll have to think about. And I believe this is just what I call hypothesis. If you're looking for any empirical evidence from me as to what I'm about to say, I cannot provide that because it does not exist. The only closest we've come to knowing the implications of what we do online, how that can probably affect what we do offline, is with the recent elections in America and what has come out of Cambridge Analytica. How people who have Facebook accounts, how it's been abused. So my view will be, perhaps, biometrics can resolve some of these lacks within the, if you like, traditional systems. But even that is debatable, in my view, in terms of unreliability of, if you like, customer identity, and also ensuring that what I call digital identities, they feel safe, but your data or our data is not abused. And finally, I was interested in hearing what our friend from the Prime Minister's office has to say in terms of identity, in terms of the lacks thereof, and probably how they are trying to resolve that. I feel it's also still weak because they need to engage with the population. They need to engage with key sectors to understand in ways through and by which some of the challenges around identity is probably or can be resolved. I don't think any country has actually fully resolved it, not certainly in the West, if you like. But there are what is called digital footprints, which can be used as a way of referencing people's behavior and their actions online. Thank you.
Thank you. Richard, so you are going to play your part?
Great. Quite a few questions. I think I'm going to kind of group them into a number of areas. There was a question about what does the sort of future of financial inclusion look like if we look across the world? And I think if you look at developed economies, the level of financial inclusion reaches about 95% of the economy. 95% of people in the economies in Europe or America will have a bank account. The 5% that doesn't tend to be very marginalized communities with specific reasons for not participating. If we look at what's been achieved in developing countries, South Africa now has a financial inclusion rate of 80% and Kenya around 66, 67%, up from about 20% 8 years ago. So very rapid advances have been achieved in developing economies. What do we need to have to achieve these advances? Well, we need two things. We do need identity, and certainly the initiatives the government is driving are crucial in this respect. But we also need, as I've highlighted, the telecommunications infrastructure. If you provide us with a robust identity system as well as a robust telecommunications infrastructure that covers the country, financial services can achieve a great deal, whether those financial services are provided by an MNO or banks. So those are really the building blocks for the future digital economy. What does this mean for the insurance sector? Again, insurance does actually require an underlying store of value or bank account. All of the progress in microinsurance across the continent has been achieved in environments where you have got this core bank account available, be it a mobile money account or a bank account. The reason why we have such high insurance penetration in South Africa is because we have such high banking penetration. So these two are not separable. If you cannot collect your premiums easily from a bank account or make your payouts into a bank account, it's very, very difficult to deliver insurance. So these really are the way this kind of world comes together. What I think the first question was about the relationship between financial sector liberalization and telecommunications liberalization. Obviously, both are highly desirable. However, with a liberalized telecommunications sector, you will see the banking sector, I think, innovating quite effectively around that. And what can we do while we wait for this liberalization? Certainly, it would seem that agency banking is one thing that can be attempted and achieved, providing we focus on robust solutions that can deal with the ineffectiveness of the telecommunications infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. So, the last.
Okay. I've received two questions. One of them, it's not a question, it's a message to be passed. The fact that the insurance sector is not given sufficient attention from the government. I'll have to pass it to the economic advisor. But the other question about the data privacy and the government's open data policy. The owner of this population database or the civil registry database is not going to know, for example, how much money you have in the bank account or who you have voted. They're only going to know your identity and connect that to a unique number. So every institution, the election board will have its own database. Financial institutions will have their own database. The credit institutions will have their own database. But this unique number will be used to index or to identify a single individual across all those services. So it brings accountability in that sort. But I was recently reading an article on India's unique identification system, the Aadhaar system. It's a 1.4 billion population, and there are over more than 120,000 system admins for the database. So for as low as 50 rupees or 100 rupees, I can pay the system admin and I can acquire any individual's history, for example, who that person is or their biometric and demographic data. So it's when we go down into the detail of actually plugging in third parties, the financial sector, into this population database, a lot of thought has to be put in. We expect a lot of help from civil societies, from partners and other global precedents in how to manage this population database. And of course, data privacy legislation and proclamation will be very important. There is an existing, in Ethiopia's case, there is an existing legislation on national identity and vital events registration, but it does not address these issues because it's outdated. It's been out since maybe a decade ago. It does not address digital identity or online identity privacy issues. So it has to be revised. I'm sure it will be revised in the coming few months. Your question about the open source, open data policy, I think it's best if The Ethiopian Science Academy has recently held public discussion on that, and they have all the documents you require on the open data policy the government is following. So I can forward you in that direction. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your reaction. In order to use our time, allocated time efficiently, let us have, second round. We have few minutes, so let me start from here.
እንዳይጠፋብኝ ከመጨረሻው ልጀምር መሰለኝ ከዮዳሄ ካቀረበው በአማርኛ ተናግሬ እናንተ ከሞከራችሁ ሌሎች ተርጉሙ ግን የሚያስፈልግ የሀገራችን ጉዳይ ስለሆነ ብዙ ማወራው ብዙ እንግሊዝኛ የሚፈልግ ነገር አልመሰለኝም እቺ ደርግ ሲወድቅ ቀበሌ ድረስ የፈጠረውን የጭቆና ስርዓት ለኢህአዴግ አሻግሮ ነው ሄደው አሁን ደግሞ የመጣው ለውጥ ምንም እንኳን በሰላም ሚኒስትሪ ስር ቢቀመጥም ተቋማቱ እንዳሉ ስለሆነ ከአንድ አካል ወደ ሌላ አካል የሚሸጋገሩት ምርጫውም ካለፈ በኋላ በአሁኑ ሰዓት የምናዘጋጀው የቁጥጥር ወይም የማንነት ማረጋገጫ ዘዴ በየትኛውም ሰዓት ሊፈጠር ለሚችል ጨቋኝ እንዳያገለግል ምንድነው መደረግ ያለበት የሚለውን በእንዲህ አይነት መድረክ ነው መነጋገር ያለባችሁ እንጂ አያበሬ ሆይ ሳሩን አይተገደሉን ይሆናል እናንተ አሁን ስለ ገንዘብ ነው የምናወራ ያለው ልክ ነው ለፋይናንሻል ኢንክሉዥን ምናልባት አይደንቲቲ ጠቅም ይሆናል ግን እኔ ይሄ ከቴምፕሪንቲንግ ካሻራ ጀምሮ ማልወደው ነገር እኛ በበላነው ብር ምክንያት በአደባባይ ብንታይም ይገባል ገመድ ሰርቆ አጎንብሶ ነው እኛ ባንደበቅ ምንም አይደለም ግን ሙያተኞች እና የቀን ውሏቸው ከቤተሰባቸው ጋር የሆኑ ብዙ ሰዎች አሉ ብሩህ አእምሮ ያላቸው አንድ ቀን መጥፎ ነገር ሲያዩ መጥፎ ነገር የሚናገሩ ሰዎች አሉ የ100 ሚሊዮን ህዝብን ዴታ በአንድ ወይም በሁለት ተቋም ስር ማምጣት በገንዘብ አሁን አንተ ራስ እንደምሳሌ ከጠራው ምሳሌም በላይ ሰውን ማጥፋት የሚችልበት ደረጃ ይደርሳል ስለዚህ መንገዱን እንዲህ በቀላሉ በሲቪል ሶሳይቲ በምን ሳይሆን ብሎክቼንን እና ክሪፕቶከረንሲን እንደፈጠሩት አይነት ጭንቅላቶች እናንተም ጋር ይኖራል እውነት በቅንነት ካያችሁት እንዴት ብሎ አንድ አይደንቲቲ ማንንም እንደማያውቀው ማድረግ እንዴት እንደሚቻል ራንደማይዝድ የሆነ ነገር ጀነሬት ማድረግ ትችላላችሁ ብዙ ቴክኒኮች አሉ እያንዳንዱ ዳታ ዛሬ ባለው የኮምፒውቲንግ ካፓቢሊቲ እያንዳንዱ አይዲ ለማንም እንዳይታወቅ ለሰውየውም ለራሱ እንደው ቢቀጠቅጡት እንኳን እንዳይናገር እንዲያደርግ ተደርጎ ጀነሬት መደረግ ይችላል ኤምፒዩ ላይ ኢንኮድድ መሆን ይችላል ማግኔቲክ ቴፑ ላይ ኢንኮድድ መሆን ይችላል ዳታቤዙ ለማንም አክሰስ እንዳይደረግ አይደንቲቲ ከሆነ የምናወራው ለገንዘብ ሲባል ግን የምንፈጥረው አይደንቲቲ ለማይክሮ ክሬዲት ተብሎ የተፈጠረው ነገር ለጭቆና ሊሆን ስለሚችል ይሄን ካሁኑ እናንተ ናችሁ እኔ እንደኔ ከሸበትክ በኋላ ይችን አታረጋት ምክንያቱም ወደ አንድ ወገን ስለምትወግን ለምሳሌ እኔ አሁን ሁለተኛው ማነሳው ነገር እኔ ከአብዮታዊ ዲሞክራሲያዊ መስመር ጋር ለረጅም ዓመታት በመቆየት ምክንያት ባለውለታይም ስለሆነ ያም መስመር ሁልጊዜም ቢሆን በራሴ አስተሳሰብ ውስጥ አገባዋለሁ እና የሚቀጥለው ጥያቄ በአማርኛ ሳጥሬ ልጠይቅና ለሳቸው ለሪቻርድ ነው የሬጉሌሽን የሊበራላይዜሽን እና ፕራይቬታይዜሽን መደበላለቅ አለ አሁን እኛ በአርሶ አደሩ ገንዘብ በብዙሃኑ ገንዘብ አንድ ጊዜ 1.6 ቢሊዮን አንድ ጊዜ 1.5 ቢሊዮን ሁለት ዌቭስ ኦፍ ኢንቨስትመንት አድርገናል ኖኪያን አስወጥተን እነ ሁዋዌ የገቡበት ኢንፌመስ የሆነው ያጭቅጭቃቸው አለ ከዛ ፊት ደግሞ አንድ ሌላ ትልቅ ዝርክርክ ያለ ብዙ ዕቃ የተገዛበት ጊዜ ደግሞ አለ ይሄንን ባክቦን የሚባለው እና ጌትዌው ዋናው ከሳተላይት ጋር የምንገናኝበትን እነሱ ሳይለፉ ለምንድን ነው የሚበሉበት የሚለው ነገር ግልጽ አይደለም ማለት ሊበራላይዜሽን እና ዲሬጉሌሽን እንደየሰውየው አገላለጽ ዛሬ አንድ ትርጉም ይኖረዋል ነገ ሌላ ትርጉም ይኖረዋል መቼም ሬጉሌትድ የማይሆን ገበያ ሊኖር አይችልም አይደለ የኛ ሰዎች ይሄ አብዮታዊ የሚባሉት ሰዎች ሌዘይ ፌር ነው ብለው ይነሳሉ ሊበራላይዜሽን ሲወራ እንዲመቻቸው ለአርጊውመንት ብለው ይሄ ደግሞ ሊበራል የሆነው ደግሞ ሲመጣ አይ ሌዘፌር አይደለም ሬጉሌትድ የሆነ ሊበራል ማርኬት ነው ነፃ ገበያ ነው የምንለው ይላሉ። ዞሮ ዞሮ እናንተ መለየት አለባችሁ። ይሄንን ማሳጠር አልችልም። ይሄ የመጣሁት እውነት ለመናገር እንዲህ አይነት ነገር በግልጽ ካልተነጋገርን አገራችን አደጋ ላይ ትወድቃለች። እሺ በቢሊየን የሚቆጠር ገንዘብ አውጥተን አርሶ አደሩንና ከተሞቹን የምናገናኝበትን ጌትዌይና ባክቦን ነው ለመሸጥ አሁን የተዘጋጀ ነው። ለማን ነው የምንሸጠው የሚለውን ነገር ለምንድን ነው የምንሸጠው የሚለውን ነገር ሳታውቁ presentation ውስጥ አለ. I'm going to switch to Amharic now. I need to, because why do people who have already become banks, although they are not, I mean, you should see his presentation. Most of the MTN has more than 25% of its financial transactions in mobile banking and something like that. So they've already become banks, really. It's just a process of registration as financial institutions, because a delay of payment of a few seconds, a few minutes, and sometimes a day really means a floating fund of billions when you have millions and billions of operators under your company. So these people are not actually requesting for the liberalization of our telecom system. They are actually trying to breach our financial system, because breach is what I call it. If you look at the funding structure of Richard's slide 2, it's mostly skewed towards capacity building of the financial institutions and not the users. This is, although he didn't show any kind of numerical order, I suspect that whatever funding is afforded to Africa today only intends to exploit it to the maximum possible. I mean, why else would people of the highest order technological and financial status in the globe be interested really in investing 30% of their capacity building funds in a continent who is really marred in poverty and diseases and stuff like that? Why don't they invest in uplifting us from poverty? And why don't they invest in good governance first before liberalizing a telecom industry, which actually translates into liberalizing the financial? They're after the CBE, really. They're not after the telecom. That's my intention. That's my comment. You have to defend.
Thank you very much. የኔ ጥያቄ ለዮዳሄ የሚሄድ ጥያቄ ነው እና ከዚህ ከናሽናል አይዲ ጋር ተያይዞ ፕሮባብሊ አሁን ቅድም ፕሬዘንት በተደረገው አይደንቲፋያብል ላይሆን ይችላል ዴታቤዙ በሚያዝበት ግን my concern is ሌሎች plug when other services plug in like finance sector and other stakeholders come in. When you talk about e-commerce, probably individual data is going to be massive, and then there could be a chance where individuals can be identified in terms of their credit scores, in terms of their history, and a lot of things. And given these, and the idea that the next oil is data, because the country that has massive data is going to be the next Saudi Arabia. That is, I think, what is the expectation right now. And China is going to be the next Saudi in terms of data. So, and they already have massive data in China, and they're trying to get access to other data, even in the US and Europe, and they take Africa for granted to get all the data that Africa has, accessing through such platforms like what we are trying to build right now as a national ID and, aligned services. So my question is, how do we really make sure that the country owns the data and keeps it so secure, and so that this could be a resource where the nation can benefit out of it? I think this is very fundamental, because I read on the news that Alibaba as a cloud service, cloud computing service and e-commerce is approaching Ethiopia to provide those services, which means directly access to data, which means then directly access to oil. And that is going to be the damage to be done in the long run. And have you really thought enough? I think the national ID, the digital ID, the fundamental gap that we have right now in Ethiopia, in Africa, in some of African countries, because our finance sector, if you ask them, they are highly collateralized because they say, I don't know who is who, so I'm not going to give you money, and I depend on buildings and other assets. So if we have national ID, which means the finance sector can plug in, but again, massive data is going out, and really what can we do to make sure we're not losing our oil to others who can make money, huge money out of it? Thank you very much.
ጊዜ የለንም። በጣም ኢምፖርታንት ነው። አንዳንዶቹ ጥያቄዎች ነገም ሌላ ቀን ነው ብለን ብናልፋቸው እስኪ በልሻ እንዳሳጠረውና ኮመንት ብቻ ሳይሆን ጥያቄው እስኪ አጭር ጥያቄ ከሆነ አጭር
እሱ ያልዘጋለ እሺ ይሰማል መሰለኝ ቴንክ ዩ አጠር ለማድረግ ሞክራለሁ አመሰግናለሁ የመጨረሻው ተናጋሪ ጥያቄ እንደሆነ ስለፈቀዱልኝ እንደው ጥያቄውን ትቼው የነበረው ብዙ የኢንሹራንስ ባለሙያዎች እዚህ ውስጥ ስላሉና ኤክስፐርቶች ስላሉ ከነሱ ይነሳል ብዬ ጠብቄ ስለነበረ ነው አጋጣሚ ግን ባይነሳም ጥያቄው አቶ ፍቅሩ ሰመራይዜሽን ባረጉት የመጨረሻው ንግግራቸው ላይ ስላካተቱት በጣም ደስ ብሎኛል ብዙ ጊዜ ስለ ፋይናንሻል ኢንክሉዥን ሲነሳ የሚነሱ ወይ የሚሰጡ ሪኮመንዴሽኖች በአብዛኛዎቹ የሚረሱ ትልቅ ነገር አለ ማይክሮ ፋይናንስም ሪኮመንድ እናርግ ዲጂታል ፕላትፎርሞችንም ሪኮመንድ እናርግ ትልቅ ሴግመንት ኦፍ ሶሳይቲ ስቲል ኤክስክሉድድ ይሆናል እና አቶ ፍቅሩ ራይትሊ አንስተዋል የዚህ የተካፉልን ጉዳይ አጋጣሚ የመጀመሪያው የአኑዋል ኢስት አፍሪካን ሳሚት ሲካሄድ እዚያ አልነበርኩም ግን ከፕሮሲዲንጉ ለመረዳት የቻልኩት ምንድነው ተመሳሳይ ትልቅ ፔፐር አቅርበው ነበር መሰለኝ አቶ ፍቅሩ ጸጋዬ አንፎርቹኔትሊ እዚህ የምንቀመጣ የፖሊሲ ሜከሮች አክተሮች ከእንደዚህ ትላልቅ መድረኮች የሚወጡ ነገሮችን ተቀብለን ቴካዌይዝ ወስደን የማስተካከል ችግር አለና አቶ ፍቅሩ ዛሬም ደግመዋል የናሽናል ፋይናንሻል ኢንክሉዥን ስትራቴጂ ይዳሳሉ እየጠብቄ ነበር በዚህ ረገድ አጋጣሚ እሱንም አልዳሰስከውም ግን ያው የጊዜ ጥረት ስለሆነ ነው እዛ ላይ ግን አሳይመንቱ የተሰጠው ለኢንሹራንስ ነው እንጂ ናሽናል ባንክ ኦፍ ኢትዮጵያ ዛሬ ተርፏል ብዙም አልተወቀሰም በዚህ ረገድ የቤት ስራውን እዛ ላይ ምንም አልጠቀሰም እና እንደው ምን ተስፋ አለ 2016 ላይም ይሄንን ተስፋን ገልጸሃል ዛሬም ገልጸሃል ግን ሪሊ ተካፉል ኢንሹራንስ እንደው መቼ ልናይ እንችላለን በኢትዮጵያን ኮንቴክስት ያንተን ሪፍሌክሽን ለማግኘት ፈልጌ ነው አመሰግናለሁ
እሺ እናመሰግናለን ዮዳሄ ያው ትለው ነገር ካለ
So the first one was about data privacy and if an individual can be traced across regions, will that not allow for the government or for anyone to abuse that information and maybe attack a certain individual? Well, my answer to that would be there needs to be a very strong legislative and regulatory involvement in ensuring data privacy. Technology is usually the easiest part. The most difficult part is the human and the institutional factor. So we have to be we have to build a very strong foundation both legally and institutionally to ensure that data privacy is ensured. But we also have to, our only option is going forward. We cannot go back to the Stone Age and we cannot have what we have currently, a paper ID that can be easily accessed with as much as 300 birr fraud. It's very common. So instead of we don't have any other option except going forward. What we can have is ensure that there is proper legislation, proper regulation, and proper data privacy laws that are in place. Otherwise, there is no other way we can bring accountability by having our current individual identity systems. We cannot maintain that. It's impossible for us to go forward. We cannot talk about e-commerce. We cannot talk about individualized services without a proper identity system. So there is no way we can go back. But of course, your comments are very valuable. And the other question about how can we own, or how can we make sure that we own our data and it does not leak, or other corporations or other governments do not profit off of our data? That's also a very valid question. That also has to be part of the legislative and the regulatory practices that we will put into place in the coming few years. But also, as I said before, there's no going back. We are not going to have paper-based identity systems. We are going to have digital identity systems. So we'll have to make sure that we own our own data and it does not leak to third parties and expose privacy. So that's what I can say.
Thank you. Fikru, እስኪ እሱ ያለው የሆነ ነገር አለ እሷን በለው።
እሺ የቀረበልኝ አስተያየት ነው ምንድነው ሪፍሌክሽን ያለ የሚል ነው። በአጠቃላይ የኢንሹራንስ ሴክተር እንዲያድግ ዛሬ ያቀረብኩትን ፔፐር ፖሊሲ ሾችን መቀየር አለባቸው ከሚለው ለህብረተሰቡ ተስማሚ የሆኑ ፕሮዳክቶችም ሚስ እንደሚያደርጉ ነው። ለምሳሌ የኛን የዴሞግራፊክ ስትራክቸር በማየት ከሃይማኖት ጋር በተያያዘ ከፍተኛ ቁጥር ያለው ሙስሊም ኮሚዩኒቲ ያለን ብለናል። ኢኮኖሚውን ደግሞ ስናይ እንደዚሁ አግራሪያን ነው ብለናል። ለነዚህ ሴክተሮች የሚሆን የኢንሹራንስ ፕሮዳክቶች በየጊዜው ቢመጡ እና ፕሮፐርሊ ዲዛይንድ ቢሆኑ የኢንሹራንስ ስርጭቱን ያሰፉታል። በአገሪቱ ውስጥ ብዙ ተጠቃሚ ይሆናል። አሁን ግን ያሉት አትራፊ ነው በርግጥ፣ ነገር ግን ኮመርሻል ሴክተሩ ላይ ያተኮሩ እና አርባን ሴንተር የሆኑ ሰርቪሶች ናቸው የሚል ነው የነበረኝ አርጉመንት። ስለዚህ በፊት ያቀረብኩትኝም የታካፉል ኢንሹራንስ፣ ላስት ይር ደግሞ ፖለቲካል ቫዮለንስ ኤንድ ቴሮሪዝም ኢንሹራንስ የሚል፣ ዘንድሮም ደግሞ እንደዚሁ ሴክተሩ በአጠቃላይ ከስትራቴጂ ቅድም የተጠቀሰው ስትራቴጂ ጀምሮ ክሊር የሆነ ዳይሬክሽን ስለሌለው እነዚህ ስትራክቸራል ቻሌንጆችን ለመቅረፍ አትሊስት በተወሰነ መልኩ ይሁን በሙሉ ለውጪ ማርኬቱ ክፍት ቢሆን የሚል ሐሳብ ነው ያመጣሁት። አመሰግናለሁ።
እሺ፣ ስለዚህ ጥሩ ቆይታ ነበረ። ያው አይሞላም፣ ሁሉም ነገር ማድረግ አንችልም። ስለዚህ ባለው ጊዜ በተሰጠን ጊዜ አንፃር አሁን እዚህ ጋር እናበቃለን። Thank you very much for your time and for your generosity again, because you have shared a lot of things from your experience. And then I have observed, as a student, you are dedicated and you are genuine and you are ready to give more. And I hope that next time we are going to earn more from you. Thank you for your attention. እግዚአብሔር ይስጥልን ነው የምንለው መጨረሻ